Rakta Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rachakodash. Welcome to another live lesson. This is another GMS Biblical History Chronicles, Alexander the Greek. And pretty much what you're looking at before you is an article from the Philadelphia Trumpet. This is a magazine that Elder Pastor would get from time to time. You know, he would subscribe to them. They would send them monthly installments, you know, that had a lot of different stories and news articles and things pertaining to prophecy. Now, this particular article was sent to me by Bunsapad out there in Dallas, and I told him, Tawada, this would be my next lesson, Lord's will. This is pretty concise. We're going to try to read the whole article. It's not that long. Just to show you how prophecy works with history. And you've heard us say before that if you don't know if you don't know history, you're not going to understand certain prophecies, because prophecies are mostly historical events, except for the ones that haven't happened yet. Now, this individual here, Alexander the Greek, which was the beginning of the Edomite empires ruling on the planet, started the Greek Empire, or the Hellenization of the world at that time. And he is mentioned in prophecy, notably in the book of Daniel, and also in the book of Revelation, So this individual that they write about, and certain generals and military men extol to the clouds and still laud and praise his strategic, or his strategies on the battlefield. All of those strategies were given to him by Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. I'm not going to really tell you too much of the article so we could just read it. But, he was brought up under Aristotle, which is the article says, which Aristotle was a Jake. With his 4 generals, a lot of them came up under that learning, And when people say that the Bible is not valid, how do you explain the prophecies and the historical accounts that took place, prior to them happening? And then in the case of Alexander, he was shown in the scriptures that they were speaking about him. There was this woman, brother sent me a video of this woman speaking about the coronavirus and how everything is a setup. And then somewhere in her speech, she said, "I'm a Bible-believing Christian. And if we believe that the Bible or the book of Revelation is true, then so-and-so in the tribulation, blah, blah, blah." So I'm like, wait a minute. That's double speak. On the one side of your mouth, you're going to say you're a Bible-believing Christian. Then you're going to say, if we believe that the Bible of the book of Revelation is true. And the book of Revelation is true, which shows you these devils, they really don't believe the book. They just use the power of the book, but they really don't believe in the book. But this book has stood the test of time. In Isaiah 34, it says that none shall want her mate, that none of the prophecies in this book are going to fail. So nevertheless, let's get started. It says Alexander the Great was mentioned in the Bible, and he knew it. This was dated April 3rd, 2016. It says the civilization-altering life of Alexander the Great is well known to most students of history. But there is one chapter of his saga that is as seldom discussed as it is fascinating. Not only was Alexander's reign predicted in the Old Testament long before he was born, but when Alexander visited Jerusalem, the high priest showed him those Bible prophecies. The priest explained, "Alexander, these prophecies are about you." And the reason why they don't speak about Alexander the Creep and in the Bible, or Alexander the Great, they call him. We call him Alexander the Greek, Alexander the Creep. But the reason why they don't really talk about this too much is because if they talk about that, that's going to give more credence to the Bible. So they rather speak of Alexander in a historical sense of the documentation that they have out there, more than the accounts in the scriptures that prophesied what he would do before he did them, because that would give more credence to the Bible, and they don't want that. It says, if you're not familiar with this intriguing chapter of history, you may be astounded to learn how Alexander reacted to that statement. It says, background. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the city of Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia, which is right above Greece. I think, I'm not sure if they still call it Macedonia. I know you have Albania in that area, but nevertheless, it says his parents were Philip II and Olympias of Epirus. From his father, Alexander learned the art and science of warfare, but historians agree that his mother was far more influential in his life. From her, Alexander inherited a profound love for learning and also his fiery, sometimes ruthless nature. During his early years, Alexander's mother constantly told him that he was part god. Her family had long claimed to be descendants of Achilles, the demigod, so she told him that this meant some divine blood was pumping through his veins. Of course, that's all nonsense, and yes, it is all nonsense. Achilles was a myth, and Alexander was a mortal man like any other. That's why he died at the age of 32. But it's important because of the profound effect these stories had on Alexander. He believed he was a descendant of Achilles, which prompted Alexander to study all that he could about the demigod. In his adult years, Alexander even carried with him a copy of Homer's Iliad, which chronicles Achilles' conquest. Every night he slept with this book under his pillow. He carried it with him into every battle. When Alexander was young, he was personally taught by Aristotle. Among the subjects Aristotle taught him was what? The Hebrew language. And this is why it was so profound that when the priest showed him in the book of Daniel that it was speaking about him, he could actually read it for himself in the Hebrew tongue because he was learnt. He wasn't only a warrior, a general, a captain, a leader, but he was also learnt. It says in 336, when Alexander was 20 years old, his father was assassinated. Alexander ascended the throne of Macedonia and took command of the massive army his father had spent his life assembling and training. So pretty much, this was the time when the Most High was ready for this devil to make his move. So he had his father assassinated because the Most High said he kills, he makes alive, he wounds, and he heals. So it was time for this individual to take his place according to prophecy on the earth. Campaigns of conquest. Almost immediately after ascending the throne, Alexander embarked on the great military crusade that his father had spent years preparing for, the conquest of the Persian Empire. For several generations before Alexander, the Persian Empire had dominated much of the known world, including some Greek cities. Many in Greece and Macedonia felt that it threatened the very existence of the Greek way of life. Just before entering into Asia Minor to wage the campaign, Alexander's mother pulled him aside and told him that his true father was not Philip, but none other than Zeus. So she's gassing his head up even more. The king of the Greek pantheon. She had always told him that he was the descendant of Achilles, but now she took this delusion a massive step further. It was the last time Alexander would see his homeland and his mother. He entered Asia Minor, and the first city he conquered was Baalbek, which he renamed Heliopolis. Then he liberated Ephesus from Persian rule. Then Alexander defeated the Persian army's main force at the Battle of Issos. Next, he sacked the cities of Sidon and Aleppo and then conquered the rest of Syria and then Egypt. So it was thought insanity back then to wage war against the Persian Empire because they had such a massive army and they had so many different nations working for them. Like you had the Immortals and different other groups that were hardcore top military men, mighty men of war. But the spirit was with Alexander, just like the spirit was with the Medo-Persian Empire to rise into power. Now the Lord was bringing them down at the height of their power and bringing in the Greeks, which was the next step in line, as we read in the book of Daniel, the 2nd chapter, which goes into the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw with the head of gold, the arms and chest of silver, then the thighs, of brass, and the legs, of iron, and the feet part iron, part clay, with the 10 toes. So this was the next empire in succession to all of those empires that were seen in the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. It says that's why the Persian Empire fell so easily to Alexander, not because he was such a great military strategist, but because the Most High was with him to bring this empire down. Things were going well for Alexander. He would have been about 24 years old, and he was undefeated. Every single battle was a victory for him. He felt invincible. He felt that his victories were proof that his mother had always been right. He would have felt like he really was a god. It was around that time that Alexander set his sights on Jerusalem. Alexander, the ancient prophecies are about you. These ancient prophecies are about you. Josephus, the Jewish historian who lived in the 1st century AD, said that when Alexander was just about to enter the city of Jerusalem, the Jewish high priest at that time, a man named Jaddua, met him on the outskirts of the city. Jaddua led a procession of affluent residents of Jerusalem. They hoped that by walking out to meet this mighty warrior, they might keep Jerusalem from being destroyed by his army. The sight of the high priest and the procession gave Alexander pause. He entered the city peacefully. Once inside, Jaddua brought Alexander to the temple and showed him some passages in the book of Daniel. The Most High had inspired the prophet Daniel to write his book back in 535 BC, about 180 years before Alexander was born. Why? Because it was prophecy, prophecy, prophecy. We know that because of Daniel 10:1, in which Daniel says he wrote in the 3rd year of the reign of Cyrus the Great. Historians agree that would have been around 535 BC, and that just shows you how prophecies work. The Most High said that his words will not go out void. All right? Jaddua would have shown Alexander such passages as Daniel 11:2-3, which discuss the Persian Empire pushing against Greece and eventually being conquered by a mighty Greek king. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And that's what they did. You know, Xerxes, Artaxerxes or Xerxes, which you hear Elder Pastor mention him all the time in the movie 300. He's the one that was stirring things up against Greece. And what happened? Eventually he was shut down because it was time for the Greek Empire to rule. And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And that was who? Alexander the Great. Which they call Alexander the Great, we call Alexander the Greek. Jaddua would also likely have shown him companion passages in Daniel 8, which give more detail about this mighty king of Greece who would defeat the Persian Empire. These passages truly are about Alexander the Great, and they were written around 200 years before his reign began. You can imagine Alexander the Great standing in the temple next to the high priest. You can imagine him being shown an ancient scroll with the words of Daniel written on it. Thanks to the education he had received from Aristotle, Alexander could read the Hebrew words Daniel had written. He needed no translation. He had also been told by his mother his whole life that he was no ordinary man, but someone with divine blood coursing through his veins. This passage in Daniel, of course, did not say he was divine in any way, but Jaddua would have told Alexander that the book had the true God's fingerprints all over it. We don't know all the details. We can only speculate about Alexander's thought process. But it may be that the fact that his mother had always told him he was of divine origin made him more open to believing these ancient holy scriptures were about him. Or maybe he was just compelled by the direct language about a mighty king from Greece overthrowing the Persian Empire, especially since he had already made so much progress toward that end. Whatever the reason, Alexander the Great believed that he himself was the man being discussed in the passages. He believed that it was a true prophecy and that he himself was in the process of fulfilling it. Josephus wrote about Alexander's reaction to Jaddua in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 11, Chapter 8, Section 5, William Whiston's translation, 1981. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was a person intended. And as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude for the present, but the next day he called them to him. and and bid them ask what favors they pleased of him, whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers, and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. He granted all they desired, and when they entreated him that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also, he willingly promised to do hereafter what they desired. Alexander not only believed the prophecies in Daniel were about himself, but because of that belief, he gave great favor to the Jews. He had pillaged and plundered many other cities, often renaming them and requiring them to adopt much of the Greco-Macedonian culture, because that's when Hellenization was on a rampage. And we read in the book of Josephus that it was the Greeks that started taking over the lands and renaming the different lands what we know them as today. That's why some of them never retained their ancient names. It says, but for the city of Jerusalem, it was different. He allowed the Jews to keep their own laws, and he made them a massive break in paying tribute. It says he gave them. He said he would basically give them whatever they asked for. Josephus goes on to explain that the Samaritans were so astounded by Alexander's treatment to the Jews that when Alexander came to their city next, they tried to convince him that they were also Jewish. They wanted to be shown that same favor. This glimpse back into a seldom discussed chapter of Alexander's life shows how prophecy and history intersect in Jerusalem in a dramatic way. Yeah, because it's all about the prophecies. To understand those astounding prophecies, that goes into something else. But pretty much, as you can see, this goes into another topic of the Samaritans, which were heathen that were inside of Samaria and those regions there that were planted there by the kings of Assyria once they took the northern kingdom down. All right, but that's just show you this short read here. It shows you how, like they said at the end, history and prophecy are intertwined with each other. You know, and this is why you always hear us say from time to time, if you don't know history, you're not going to understand certain prophecies. So now let's get into the scriptures dealing with this individual, Alexander the Crete. And the first scripture we go to is Daniel 7:6. It says, after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard. This leopard represented Alexander the Crete, and it also represented the Greek Empire, because there are busts of this individual and pictures of him where he has an actual animal head on his head. You know, he conquered the leopard and different other animals, and he would put their head on them, their skin on his head like a helmet. And this was to fulfill prophecy. It says, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. So this empire, which was the Greek Empire, which was headed by Alexander the Crete, had 4 wings of a fowl on its back, which represented the 4 generals. He had many generals, but there were 4 main generals that actually ruled with him and helped him conquer. You know, and that was Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Those 4. And out of those 4, the main 2 that really grew to prominence, according to prophecy, was the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemaic dynasty. All right, it says the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Yeah, because they conquered the known world at that time. Now, when we go into Daniel the 8th chapter, it goes into a little more detail of what took place and how Alexander the Crete came into power. Daniel 8:1, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, which King Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon. This was the actual king that was in power the night when they were drinking out of the holy vessels of the Lord, and the Lord made that hand write this particular writing on the wall that no one understood but Daniel. Okay, it says Belshazzar in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel. So this vision that we're reading about was actually a prophecy or a vision that the Lord gave to Daniel. After that, which appeared unto me at the first, and I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Now, if you look at a map, this is the Persian Empire. This is modern day. This is ancient Babylon. This is modern day, Iraq here, Iran. And if you see here, you have Elam. That's why we tell you that the Iranians, the original Iranians, were Elamites. So you have Elam here, where he was, we read about. You have Susa, which is the palace at Shushan, where he was at. And he said he was by the river Ulai. And on the east of Shushan, you have the river Ulai there. So in this picture, you will have the river Ulai on this side of Susa or Shushan. All right, so this is where the area was at. You had the Medes here, the Persians. This is where Daniel saw this vision at. It says, "Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last." So this ram represents the joint empires of the Medes and the Persians. That's what they call it, the Medo-Persian Empire. And that's what the two horns represent, two major powers, two major governments. And the two horns were high because they were exalted, because it was their time to rule. They were that breast and arms of silver. This was the next empire in succession to rule after the Assyro-Babylonian Empire. It says, "And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other," because eventually the Persians became greater than the Medes. It says, "And the higher came up last," because the Medes conquered first, then the Persians came in there with them, but the Persians became greater than the Medes. That's why it was known at one point as the Persian Empire. It says, "I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward." So why was it pushing this way? Because that's where the major empires were at the time, or the lesser empires. So they were in the east, pushing westward and southward and northward. And there were different empires that they conquered, but that goes into a whole nother lesson. It says, "So that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great." Why? Because this empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, they were the ones that were to conquer next. And there was no one that was going to able to stand in front of them. Just like when Esau, through the so-called American Empire, was rising into power, no one could stand before him. Why? Because it was their time to rule. And when it's your time to rule, there's nothing anyone can do to bring you down from that. That's why the next empire to rule is Yahushai / Israel's kingdom, and no one's going to be able to stand in the way of Yahushai setting up his kingdom. Why? Because it's prophesied, and the Most High stands behind his word. So it says, "And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth." So this he-goat represents Alexander the Creep. Matter of fact, let's jump down to the 20th verse. It says, "The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia." That's why it's known as the Medo-Persian Empire. "And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king." So now when we jump back up, it says, "And I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth." Because where did Alexander the Creep come from? He came from the west. Just bear with me one second. Just bear with me one second. And as we see here, you have Greece down here, and you have up here what? Macedonia. You have Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, Bulgaria. So this is Macedonia is where? In the west, in comparison to the Medo-Persian Empire. You would have to go westward to get to Greece, to get to Macedonia. All right. So now going back, it says, "And touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes." And why did it say it touched not the ground? Because he conquered these regions with ease, and he didn't stop. It's almost like he was floating, on a cloud, taking all these empires down. where it took his father years and years and years of preparation and preparation and preparation, and he never got a chance to launch that assault because it was time for him to go. So he was assassinated because it was not up to him to conquer the Persians, even though he wanted to. That job was given to his son in prophecy, which is Alexander. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So now when we read about this notable horn, the notable horn means that it was a prophetic power that was going to rule, which this horn right here represents Alexander the Creep, not to be mistaken with the other little horn that we're going to read further down, which represented Antiochus Epiphanes. So let's look up this word notable just so you can see. The word notable is chazawath, which means vision, conspicuousness, vision, oracle of a prophet, agreement, conspicuousness in appearance. So he was great, notable, but it was also prophesied. He was also prophesied to do these things. It was prophesied. This horn, this power, this man, this individual was prophesied to be this great king that was going to conquer these lands. And now I said, don't let this notable horn representing Alexander the Creep be mistaken with the little horn that came next, which was Antiochus Epiphanes. It says, this is verse 8. It says, therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven, because these 4 notable ones were the 4 generals that were also prophesied to rule in his kingdom. And out of one of them came forth a little horn. Now this little horn represented Antiochus Epiphanes. You see? Which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land, because he's the one that destroyed the pleasant land. And that goes into a whole nother thing. So this notable horn, as we read in the 21st verse, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now, where do we also read about this first king? Well, we have to go all the way to the book of Maccabees, 1 Maccabees 1:1, to get the name of the individual, because in Daniel, the whole book of Daniel, in the prophecies, it never mentioned his name. It never mentioned him by name. But when we go to Maccabees, it mentions names. And this is one of the reasons why this book is not wanted in the scriptures, because it has too many revealing things that put the pieces of the puzzle together. There's a lot in this book, in the book of the Apocrypha, that puts a lot of pieces together that you wouldn't understand, without it. So this is 1 Maccabee 1:1, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim. Now, where is the land of Kittim? It is actually an island. It is actually an island in the Mediterranean Sea, which name has been changed since then. Let me see if I can find a map for it. You know what? Let me try to see if I can let me see something. Just bear with me 1 second. Here we go. This is going to be kind of small. Let me see how it's going to look. Yeah, it's a little too small. Here we go. Hopefully this is big enough. All right, this will have to do. As you can see here, this is Kittim, and it's also known today as Cyprus. And if you don't know where Cyprus is located, well, when we go, let's see if this map will do it. Yep. When we go here, you have here, this is the Mediterranean Sea. This is so-called Africa, the Middle East, Asia Minor. And you have here Kittim, which is also known as Cyprus. That's the name today. So we read here, it says, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes, that he reigned in his stead, what? The first over Greece. So now we understand what is meant in the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, where it speaks about him being that great notable horn that reigned. You know, the first over Grecia. We know what his name is based off of the scriptures. So because everything ties together. So now, as we read it, let's read this again. Therefore, Daniel 8:8. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which was who? That was Antiochus Epiphanes, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And like I said, that's going into something else. So now let's go back to Maccabees, and it says, and made many wars. Did we not read in Daniel the 8th chapter how Alexander made many wars and how his feet didn't touch the ground? Let's see if we can find that real quick. Verse 5, and as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. See? And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, which we read is Alexander. So it says, and made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth, the ones that were in power, and went through the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him. Why? Because you couldn't stand against them. Why? Because it was a time of the Greeks to rule in prophecy. Whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. So he got proud. And he gathered, and he had his mother, had told him that he was a demigod, that he was, the blood of Achilles ran through him, and that his father really wasn't Philip, it was Zeus. So he was gassed up, and he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. And we read that the nation of Israel was exempted from that. From them heavy taxes. I mean, they still paid tribute, but not on the level of them other nations. And after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule every one in his place. Now that leads us to Daniel, the 11th chapter. It says in the, what verse was that? Oh, 2nd verse. And now will I show thee the truth, but behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia, which that was Xerxes or Artaxerxes in the movie 300. It says, and a mighty king shall stand up, and this mighty king, we read already, is Alexander the Great, that shall rule with great dominion. And he had great dominion because he conquered the whole known world at the time. He conquered so much that there was nothing left for him to conquer. And when there was nothing left for him to conquer, what happened? There was records that stated that he actually cried because there was nothing else for him left to conquer. That shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, because his children didn't take over the throne. His sons didn't take over the throne. It was his generals. No, and it was stated in history that his wife and his son were murdered, after his death. No, according to his dominion. Why? Because his dominion had what? He had the whole dominion under one rule. When the generals took over, that kingdom broke up into many different factions. So they didn't rule like when Alexander had it as one. Which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. Okay? It says, and the king of the south. Okay, that's going into something else. So we get the idea that Alexander the Great is in the scriptures in prophecy. All right, and that was based off of this webpage here, the trumpet, the Philadelphia trumpet, Alexander the Great was mentioned in the Bible, and he knew it. All right, so that's pretty much the lesson. GMS Biblical History Chronicles, Alexander the Greek. And there's much more you could go into with that, but those are the main points. If you want to get more information, you could type in Alexander the Great and get more information on it, and his conquests and different things that he did, which is cool if you know. But the main things that we need are the things that pertain to prophecy. Anything else is just extra gravy. So the reason why that happened, let's leave you this one precept, is because the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and he's the one that's setting one up and putting one down. Psalm 75 and oh wow. You know what? I'm starting at 1. Unto thee, O Most High, do we give thanks. Unto thee do we give thanks, for that thy name is near, thy wondrous works declare. It says, when I shall receive the congregation, I will judge uprightly. The earth and all the inhabitants thereof are dissolved. I bear up the pillars of it, Selah. I said unto the fools, deal not foolishly, and to the wicked lift not up the horn. Why? Because you can't lift up your horn or your power, because the Most High is the one that's given dominion and taken away dominion. Lift not up your horn on high, speak not with a stiff neck, for promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but the Most High is the judge. He pulleth down one and setteth up another. So why was Alexander the Great able to do that in such a short a time? Because the Most High was with him, because that was the individual spirit that came into that body and that flesh named Alexander, that was to fulfill the prophecy that the Most High has spoke of through the mouth of Daniel about approximately 200 years before he even was born or ruled. For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup, and the wine is red. It is full of mixture, and he poureth out of the same. But the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall wring them out and drink them. And we're coming to this point now, where the Most High is going to pour his fury upon this whore, America. But I will declare forever, I will sing praises to the power of Jacob. All the horns of the wicked also will I cut off. So all of these Edomite empires that you see ruling today, beginning with America and the European allies and all that, the Most High, those are all extensions from the Greek Empire. Because you had the Greeks, the Romans, the French, the Spanish, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and Britain. And out of Britain, which was the seventh head, came out the eighth, which was what? America. In America, it would be the revival of the ancient Roman Empire with her allies, the EU and NATO. And now these horns that are ruling the earth, pretty much, the Most High is going to break them down. All the horns of the wicked also will I cut off, meaning all the powers will I cut off, but the horns of the righteous shall be exalted. So that's been a history lesson. GMS Biblical History Chronicles, Alexander the Great. Shalom to the elders and Akim and Akwaf that on the comment board, the water for the scriptures and everything you put up. But Salaki, I didn't get to any of those. But I pray that you brothers have been edified. Until the next time I say Shalom. And he's the one that's setting one up and putting one down. Psalm 75 and oh wow. You know what? I'm starting at 1. Unto thee, O Most High, do we give thanks. Unto thee do we give thanks, for that thy name is near, thy wondrous works declare.